Unconscious bias, social justice, inequality, and a fair society. What is unconscious bias? Unconscious bias or implicit bias is our fundamental way of looking at and encountering the world, and this is driven by a hardwired pattern of making unconscious decisions about others based on what feels safe, likable, valuable, and competent. Now, everyone has biases which can be either positive or negative and which we may be unaware of. Everyone has biases that are good or bad towards someone, something, or some group. Unconscious biases are simply the brain's way of coping with and categorizing all the information we receive daily. So I really want you to think about unconscious bias. Is unconscious bias this minor thing that maybe we need to learn about and have some training about, or is this something or this concept, can it really impact larger societal issues as we move forward? Unconscious bias has great societal impact. It impacts employment, criminal justice, health, and education. With respect to employment, how does unconscious bias operate in workplaces? Well, unconscious bias impacts recruitment, mentoring, assignments, training opportunities, including of ideas and suggestions, interacting with colleagues, making promotional choices, providing professional development, giving performance reviews, deciding on organizational policy, conducting marketing strategies, and treating customers with respect. Some examples of unconscious bias. Less than 15% of American men are over 6 foot tall, yet almost 60% of corporate CEOs are over 6 foot tall. With respect to gender bias, this has to do with our assumptions about the characteristics of men and women. The maternal wall is the assumption that mothers are not as competent as others, are not as committed to their jobs, and belong at home because they can't be both good mothers and good workers. A study found that the term manager is used, it led to 80% of the participants to think of a male. Supported by research. CV resume discrimination research found discrimination was consistent across all occupations and different business sectors. Internationally, when everything else on the CV is the same, males were selected over females, white and Asian Americans were selected over African Americans and Mexican Americans. Higher quality CVs and resumes receive fewer callbacks for racial ethnic minorities than lower quality CVs and resumes for white candidates. In terms of criminal justice, research shows that Black African American men are significantly more likely to be stopped and questioned by the police and arrested. Black men are far more likely to receive a harsher sentence when convicted compared to white men. Black African American women are 4 times more likely than white women to be sentenced to prison for the same or similar conduct, and they are sentenced for a longer term than white women. Research also supports the fact that Black men are twice as likely to be sentenced to death for capital crimes in comparison to white males. Criminal justice consequences of unconscious bias includes racial profiling, which is the practice of targeting individuals for unfavorable treatment or suspecting individuals of unlawful or unethical behavior based solely on the individual's perceived race or ethnicity. Research suggests that all white juries are more likely to convict minority defendants than white defendants for the same crime. Research also shows that defendants who kill white victims are much more likely to receive the death penalty than those who kill Black victims. Research on shooter bias, which used simulation tests, found that A white person took less time to shoot an unarmed black man than to shoot an armed white man. Also, whites will shoot black African Americans more frequently. The research that focuses on unconscious bias impacts on education focuses on teacher bias. Some of the academic achievement gaps between different racial groups is due to long-standing societal factors. However, many studies show that the inequalities are perpetrated in the classroom by teachers. Teacher bias manifests itself in who takes honor courses, who takes remedial courses, suspensions and discipline, achievement rates, graduation rates, retention rates, and graduation outcomes. Unconscious bias impacts health and healthcare. Research shows that medical conclusions are often based on a person's race, ethnicity, and other demographic identities, just as much as the symptoms they present. Unconscious bias can lead to negative outcomes or false assumptions, which impacts treatment, care, as well as life and death. So, take a look at the characters on the screen. What do you see? So, if you said the cat, that's the wrong answer. If you take a look at it, if you take a look at what you think might be the H in the, or what you thought was the, and the A and what you thought was cat, they're actually symbols that have no meaning. And so that's unconscious bias. Unconscious bias made you put those characters as letter, which was familiar to you, to make sense out of what you were seeing. Unconscious bias can certainly lead to stereotypes. Be careful of stereotypes. Take a look at these pictures. Only one of them is a convicted felon. Did you guess right? It's the woman, Martha Stewart. She is the only convicted felon in these pictures. So, how big is the issue of unconscious bias? It's pretty big. A vast body of research on unconscious bias shows that there are approximately 150 different types of unconscious biases. However, for the purpose of this video, unconscious biases impacting the workplace will be the focus. There are 5 fundamental unconscious biases that influence workplaces. The first is infinity bias. Infinity bias is the tendency to warm up to people like ourselves. So for example, they may like the same things, they may have attended the same schools, or had the same background. The halo effect bias is the tendency to think everything about a person is good because you like that person. So if you like that person, then they're a great performer, they're a great singer, they're good at their job, they're a great parent. So in the workplace, this manifests in people getting promotions or raises because you like that person. And if that person is a supervisor that likes someone and that has the halo effect, then that person is going to do quite well in the work environment. Perception bias. Perception bias is the tendency to form stereotypes and assumptions about certain groups that make it impossible to make an objective judgment about members of those groups. So, for example, if you have the perception that women aren't good, for example, in math or sciences, or not interested in math or sciences, or if you feel that women aren't leaders and you don't perceive, or your perception is that women are not the leadership type in a work environment, then that is going to impact whether a person is promoted or perceived in a leadership position, even if a female got a leadership position, if she could be an effective leader. Confirmation bias is the tendency for people to seek information that confirms pre-existing beliefs or assumptions. So, for example, if you that other example that I just gave you about women, if you perceive a woman not being good at math, then a person with confirmation bias will look and seek out information to confirm the bias and say, aha, I told you this person wasn't good at math, for example. Or if something happens on her leadership team, or if she's the head of a committee, will look for things to substantiate if that female is not a good leader. Groupthink, this is bias. This is bias that occurs when people try too hard to fit into a particular group by mimicking others or holding back thoughts and opinions. This causes them to lose part of their identities and causes organizations to lose out on creativity and innovation. So, a great example of this is when you have a search committee and you're looking at different candidates, and there's someone on the search committee that likes a particular candidate, but maybe the person who's perceived as a leader of the group doesn't like this candidate. And then multiple people will join in and say, no, this is not a good candidate. And that person who likes the candidate will begin to find negative things or go along with the group and not give their opinion of why they thought that candidate was a good candidate. So, how should we address unconscious bias? As you can see, unconscious bias can be dangerous, detrimental, and even in some cases lethal. So, unconscious bias should not be left unchecked and unmanaged because it can result in some negative outcomes for particular groups. So, did you know that researchers and practitioners conclude that biases can essentially be unlearned? Because the neuroscience behind unconscious bias suggests that with certain tools, unconscious biases can and has been eliminated. Here are some of my suggestions for addressing unconscious bias. Identify what your biases are. Some can be positive and some can be negative. We all have biases, and becoming aware of our own biases will help us mitigate them in the workplace. Notice your defensiveness to your biases and accept the discomfort of unlearning and relearning different things. Dissect your biases. Explore the significance and unconscious effect of early messages you received as you grew up about different people. For example, men, women, different gender identities, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, and so on. Decide which biases you will address first. Support projects that encourage positive images of persons of color, LGBT individuals, women, the disabled, and so on. More suggestions for addressing unconscious bias. Identify, support, and collaborate with effective programs that increase diversity in the pipeline at your workplace. Reward employees who volunteer with these groups, create internships and other bridges, and celebrate the stories of those who successfully overcome obstacles. Lead by example. The behavior of leaders is by far the biggest influence on how others will behave, and therefore a critical driver of change to the more inclusive culture. Well, thanks for watching. I just wanted to let you know that I have some new merch that's on my business website, which is www.kelleyconsultingfirm.com. This is a mug that says, I fired the boss and now I'm the boss. And I have a number of other items on that website for you to purchase, including ebooks, forms, and training programs as well. If you like this video, make sure you click on the like button and subscribe, and don't forget to click on the bell. And I want to conclude by stating that if you have any suggestions or ideas of other videos or presentations or I should do, please let me know and drop me a line in the comments section. Thanks again.